You are listening to KC Sports Network, the #1 podcast network for today's Kansas City sports fans. With former players from your favorite teams, informed perspectives, and former insiders, this is the place for you. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts or on our YouTube channel, all over social media, or our morning newsletter, KCSN Daily, dedicated to your Kansas City Chiefs. KC Sports Network is proudly presented by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible.
The Kansas City Chiefs have set their initial 53-man roster for the 2022 season. We're here to break it down, discuss all of the happenings of today. Very excited. What's up, everybody? Kent Swanson here on the KC Sports Network channel with my dear pals. I'm used to throwing it to this guy. Found him on Twitter at Matty_KCSN. Matthew Lane. Happy 53-man day, I guess. We'll go with that.
Happy 53-man day. Okay, no, we can run with that. It's interesting to be recording a podcast here in the middle of the day. It's still like semi-sunshine outside right now. This is different, but I'm excited. We got some real Chiefs news to talk about and come hang out with BJ Kissel here for a little while with the fresh and clean haircut.
What's up, guys? It's nice to talk to you guys when it's not just post game and we're all just going through all the emotions that we normally do when the three of us get together. But I'm excited about this. I'm excited we finally have a roster. At least as of Tuesday, it's probably going to change a little bit, and we'll talk through kind of looking into some of the tweets we've seen from some of the guys who did, or at least one guy in particular who did not make it today, who will probably be right back on the roster within the next 48 hours. But let's break it all down, Kent.
Yeah, let's get going. There's two sides of the football. Football's not special teams, whatever. Defensive side of the football. We'll start there. There were some interesting storylines that we were kind of examining, discussing yesterday when we were looking on the lab and KCSN Daily and all that stuff. The defensive line, it was fascinating to me. There's 10 defensive linemen that made it. It was 6 defensive ends and 4 defensive tackles because Malik Herring and Josh Kando both made the initial 53-man roster. That's fascinating to me. I was kind of anticipating both of those guys. One of those two was going to be off the board. I was pretty stunned by that, Matthew.
Yeah, we touched on it, I think, a little bit last night on the laboratory where there was a chance where they would keep both of them given Carlos Dunlap's Achilles injury that he's been dealing with. Frank Clark's had a sickness that has kept him out from a few practices. He wasn't the healthiest he had been last year. So there was a path to keeping 6 defensive ends just for the depth purpose, and that would come, I guess, at the detriment of the defensive tackle position, in which we see that happen. The Chiefs keep 4 defensive tackles with both Danny Shelton, Taylor Stallworth being waived, not making the initial 53-man roster. You get 6 defensive ends instead. So it took me by surprise a little bit, but we at least called it out that this was a possibility given the health and the age of some of the defensive ends they had. I did want to throw something to BJ. Craig had a point in the DMs. I think he's busy with, saving the world or whatever it is Craig's doing right now. He said he wonders if Malik Herring isn't also another guy that might be an IR candidate. He's currently dealing with an oblique injury. He gets through the 53-man roster, then goes on IR, has to miss, up to 4 weeks minimum. Just what would that, could that be an option they're going for? And then maybe they'll come back and bolster the defensive tackle position that looks a little bare right now with the moves they've made.
That wouldn't surprise me at all for somebody else, because based on what we had seen from the tweets and what I was alluding to earlier, it seems like Elijah Lee is the guy who's about to come right back. Based on him saying, keep your 44 jerseys, Kansas City. I mean, I don't know how much more obvious you can get than he's coming back, alluding to the fact that he'll be right back. So we've talked about it for the last 4 days. Everybody's been talking about Blake Bell going to IR for a significant amount of time. It sounds like Andy Reid saying he's not going to come back anytime soon. And Andy Reid to say something like that is pretty telling, that it's going to be several weeks before Blake Bell is back, if not more than that. And so, yeah, I'd say the one surprise looking at the defense to me was Danny Shelton. But I'm not going to let that be the thing if another player does go on IR and they had that scenario play out with 2 guys. So if it's Elijah Lee and Danny Shelton come back, but to sign a player of Danny Shelton's what he's done throughout his career to come in, not play a whole lot in the preseason, really not do a lot in training camp, kind of bring him along slowly, only for him not to make it, seems a little strange to me. And so it's, by all intents and purposes, we know Elijah Lee is coming back. I think we put that out there now. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens with Danny Shelton. That's the one surprise in looking at this. And you guys, I know, had been talking about, the DiCaprio Boodle, Chris Lamons, kind of back and forth and how that was going to play out. And, Chris Lamons had outplayed him during the preseason. So that wasn't a huge surprise, Kent, to me.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a big surprise that Chris Lamons made the team. You're right. I think he's a guy that was very well established as a special teams ace for Dave Tobe, and I think I think we all kind of had a feeling that Lamons was going to wind up on this roster. We just all really hoped that it wasn't at the expense of Jalen Watson, which it wasn't. Look, I think anybody that's watched the preseason has kind of figured out Jalen Watson's had a fantastic camp, and he's really done everything you could possibly ask of him to earn an opportunity on this team, and it paid off. He wasn't. I don't even think he was really in question as a bubble player for the majority of camp, and that speaks to what he was able to put on tape, Maddie.
I'd agree with you. I think as soon as Steve Spagnuolo just invoked his name on his own when asked about, replacing Rashad Fenton, I think it was at that point that you knew for sure that he's making this roster, and he might have already been locked in before that. And outside the defensive line, the linebacker group, the defensive back room, I think went kind of exactly as most people thought, especially as we got down the stretch. Yeah, Elijah Lee being initially waived, maybe a little bit of a surprise, but I think we kind of see what the Chiefs are doing there.
That's a favor. I think both sides are in agreement. They're willing to help this team. They're willing to help each other out a little bit. Elijah Lee wants to be here. I think the Chiefs obviously want Elijah Lee to be there. They're just getting a little cute with the roster configuration. I think that's all that is.
Yeah, so I think the back half, the second level, third level, I think that all kind of went as everybody expected. It was really just the defensive line. It's unfortunate to see DiCaprio Boodle not be able to capitalize on getting those second team reps to the slot cornerback spot. You would have liked to see him really take those reins and maybe push Lamons for that final defensive back roster spot. I just think once, you got that final preseason game and maybe through practice, that one became not that close either, because the Chiefs needed their special teams ace, especially we'll get to it on the offensive side, but they may have lost some special teams guys, a lot of special team reps on that side of the ball too. Lamons was going to be hard to overtake, and I don't think Boodle did enough this offseason to do that this year.
Yeah, guys, I want to ask your opinion on this, because I know you guys in the laboratory, you get into it and then we do our own thing. And sometimes we end up getting in the group DMs and we kind of have our own conversations. But Colin Saunders was one of the guys that a lot of people, I'd say, I don't know how split it was, but it seemed like there were a lot of people that did not think Colin Saunders was going to make this team. My argument, besides the fact that I'm biased and I just like the dude and I want him around, but is also that it's really hard to find guys of his size and athletic ability. And that I feel like Steve Spagnuolo can find a use for a guy like Colin Saunders with his quickness and all of that. I think it's a very specific role in pass rushing situations from what I have seen and just what we know from him athletically. But I wasn't surprised for that, because you can't find that on the practice squad. You can't replicate and just pull that kind of guy off the street where you can with some of these other positions, whether it's bringing somebody up from the practice squad, something like that. I just feel like what Colin brings is really hard to find, and they didn't feel like either he wasn't going to make it through waivers or they do have a plan that he's going to get some snaps and rotations. Because I know one of the things we talked about on Outside the Trenches a lot is your best defensive lineman for the Chiefs is only still playing 58-60% of the snaps anyway. These guys are rotating a lot. They want to keep fresh bodies. And so, Kent, were you surprised that Colin Saunders made it?
I don't know if I was surprised. I think he earned it. But I think it was throughout the course of the preseason. Like, I think, the signing of Danny Shelton put a little bit of pressure on him, and he was really strong after he got released, or after Danny Shelton got added. I looked at, Colin Saunders in how, like, that I was a little bit leery of keeping there, because you have a guy like Treshaun Wharton who's more, he's an interior pass rusher, right? He's not necessarily a run stopping player. In fact, that's probably one of his biggest weaknesses, but as an interior rusher, he's outstanding. And I looked at this roster and I said, okay, so outside of Derek Nottie, who's the guy that's really going to be able to anchor in the middle of the field against the run? Because Chris Jones and Tershawn Wharton, those aren't necessarily their strengths. Colin Saunders kind of fit into that mold of more of I think he's a penetrating interior rusher more than he is a guy that's going to be an early down run stopper. And so I think that's where this team looked and said, we need guys that are going to be a little bit more capable of doing that. I think Taylor Stallworth was a little bit better at doing that, anchored in the middle of the field against the run. And obviously Danny Shelton is just a giant anchor. I mean, that dude is built to do that. So I think for Colin, it was roster construction for me personally, but once they brought Danny Shelton in, I think everything kind of just, hit for him and he played outstanding for the rest of the training camp.
I think the big thing was he took a step forward, right? You look back and it shouldn't be a surprise that a guy coming from a smaller school when he gets to the NFL takes a little bit of time, especially when dealing with an injury that keeps him, held out for the majority of his rookie year. Comes into his second year, he maybe loses a roster spot to someone like Tershawn Wharton coming along or something like that. It's just going to take some time. And I think you saw at the start of training camp seeing a couple reps. There's always been flashes in Colin Saunders' game, but it hasn't been that consistent. But I think we don't get to see every practice rep. But as the preseason games went along, you start to see more consistency. He took over a couple of those games. And yeah, he's working against backups or third stringers, but that still wasn't there in the past. So he clearly, I think, elevated his game. Maybe he's been around the league long enough that it's there. And yet, like Kent said, I think he went out and took and earned this roster spot. I had him squarely outside the 53 starting the offseason just based on the way he played in the past and the moves the Chiefs had made. He played himself up and above Taylor Stallworth, above Danny Shelton from, with the little bit of time he got here. Now, I will go a little bit with Kent. I think this run defense in the interior is scary. If they happen to lose Derek Nottie for any reason, I don't love Wharton or Saunders or Chris Jones kind of bolstering your run defense up the middle. So it's an interesting fit, but he still earned a spot. So I'm happy that he did. I recently went back and found an old lost interview that I had with him from the Senior Bowl, the first year we got to go. It was just fun to go back and listen to him there when he was, fresher, just out of college, not sure what to do with all the media. It was a fun listen. He's a fun guy. So I'm glad that he finally is kind of getting there and coming into his own at the NFL level.
Glad you got that interview in because he had to leave early I think he had a baby during
the
Senior Bowl. That was like the big story. I remember running into you guys and seeing you guys run around with all your stuff, getting those interviews on media day. That was fun.
Just eyes wide open, cold sweats because we hadn't been there before. Yeah.
Yeah. You got a crash course in what media at the Senior Bowl is like. And you get 30 minutes with 60 guys or whatever, half the team or whatever it was. And just good luck. They're all covering their names and numbers. You can barely figure out who they are. And then you just see the guy in the corner with a big old smile on his face talking about, I think his daughter getting ready to be born. So that was a pretty cool moment. I remember that for Colin. But guys, while we wrap up the defense before we move to the offensive side. And again, thank you everybody who's out there watching right now. Please go ahead and like and subscribe to this video. It helps us at KC Sports Network not only know that we're doing things right, but it helps more people find it. That's the way that the YouTube algorithm works. So we appreciate it if you can like and subscribe and let us know in the comment section. Tucker is producing from behind the scenes and he'll bring some of your comments and questions up. So let us know what you're thinking there. But guys, I know it's hard because, almost 1,000 guys just got released today and you don't know who all of them are. You don't have the tagging programs that the Chiefs and the NFL teams do for guys that you want. But have you seen any players out there? Maddie, you were just talking about the interior defensive line.
He's got a list.
He's got a whole list.
Of course you. We didn't even plan that.
Funny you mentioned that, BJ, because
before we get there, because you made it.
Oh, okay. I was going to say I was writing about it on the KCSN Substack tomorrow. So just to keep your eyes out for it, because that's what's coming up tomorrow over at the KCSN.substack.com.
What a second. That's perfect. You just mentioned the run defense. We still don't know. And I'd still be a little more surprised in 2 days if Danny Shelton's still not on this team. And so I don't know if there's another guy going to IR. You mentioned that earlier. So you talk about the interior run defense. If it's not Danny Shelton, maybe they know, teams know, like the player, they can get an idea based on the roster numbers. If there's a guy they like that might get released from another team on the defensive side, Maddie, since you have a list, who out there do you like? And are there any positions that you wouldn't be surprised seeing the Chiefs pick up somebody on the waiver wire?
So the first position that jumps to mind, I think, is just tight end to replace Blake Bell, who's kind of been pretty much guaranteed that he is going to IR. We've heard it from Andy and from Herb Etiopi. So I think not getting or if the Chiefs don't bring in an inline blocking tight end, I'd be a little surprised. I think that's a move that they are going to heavily look at. The defensive side, I'm with you. I think Danny Shelton should come back in some way, but if not, a guy that I liked coming out of college, he was coming out of Arkansas, was McTelvin Ajim. He's been playing in Denver. The offensive line there, according to beat reporters, have been raving about him for years and how talented he is. He struggled to kind of put it all together, similar to a Colin Saunders, but there's still a lot of talent there. So he's a guy I have my eyes on. And then Carlos Watkins, he'd be a little bit more of a run defending interior defensive lineman. He's been with the Texans the past couple seasons. He can sit in there, anchor up versus the run a little bit. I don't think he's a guy that's going to turn a lot of eyes, but he can come in, eat some snaps if the Chiefs need someone to come in and kind of help defend the run a little bit. So those are a couple of the guys that we got the eyes on ready for, but there will be some more dropping tomorrow for anybody that's subscribed to the KCSN Substack.
Look at that tease. This man's an absolute expert at this point. I'm with you. Like there was one defensive, I am not here to dunk on professional athletes that are at the top of their game and are just on the cusp of being on the 53-man roster. But I look at Malik Herring and I look at Joshua Kando, and I think those are two guys that I think could potentially be improved upon at this point. And we'll see what happens with Malik Herring if he winds up going on the IR. We'll see there. But I think those are guys that you can make improvements upon at the edge position too. I know Kimoko Toure just got released by the 49ers. That's another guy that I would kind of keep my eye on too. I think he has a 5.5 sack season to his name. Wouldn't hate the idea of him. Is it time to move on to the offense? I think we've gotten the defensive side about covered. We good to move on to the offense because that's really that's the only thing that matters. If you've ever listened to the KC Laboratory, it's all offense, no defense. And we only lead with defense when Craig's not here. It's perfect. I'm ready to
one question on defense.
Of course.
No, just one. How surprised are you guys that Jermaine Carter didn't make the roster given the contract? Just given the guaranteed money in the contract.
Look,
I would have been shocked if he did make it. It's just sometimes the contract tells you a little bit. There being that much guaranteed money wrapped in. I know there was a path to say, oh, nope, they paid him. He's going to make it. I think no special teams reps. That's what it was. The lack of special teams reps is really the killer there. You're going to pay him regardless, but why keep a roster spot if he's not going to even play special teams?
He disrupted one play I can remember, and he was a little bit late on special teams.
I saw a 220-pound linebacker that never looked super athletic. And so it wasn't a good, if you're Mike that can't move laterally a whole, you got one of those positions, figure out a role for you. But to be 220, not show side to side, I didn't see it from the beginning, and it was a numbers thing. And I always made the point, and if they don't end up on the practice squad, the point was moot, but it still ended up the same place, that Jermaine Carter didn't make the team. But Mike Rose, Jack Cochran, that you've got young, undrafted free agent type linebackers that you could call up from the practice squad if you need a special team, if you are down to the point where you need a sixth linebacker, better to save those spots for guys like Colin Saunders who might be able to give you some juice in some different ways.
All right, let's move on to the offense. It's time to kind of get a look at that group. We started with defense. We're trying to move on to the offense now. It's definitely some surprises when you look at this initial 53-man roster for the offensive side of the ball. The Chiefs keep 4 running backs. They keep 3 quarterbacks. They keep 4 tight ends, although Blake Bell will be going on the IR, it is believed. And they keep 9 offensive linemen, 5 tackles, really. When they keep 5 tackles, some interesting things there. Only 5 receivers. That's kind of your initial breakdown. There's a lot to discuss here with this. I want to start with Shane Buechele because we talked about.
You called
this.
it.
It was, it was worth talking about. If the Chiefs did keep Shane Buechele, I think that said a lot about their plans for Shane Buechele in the future. I think that, I think Patrick Mahomes likes having Shane Buechele in that quarterback room with him. I genuinely believe that. Chad Henne's on the end of his career. I think that there's probably some intangible stuff about Shane Buechele that Patrick Mahomes likes. I just kind of reading between the lines. This is not source. This is me just kind of guessing. I don't think it makes sense very often to have 3 quarterbacks on the roster, especially when you have the best player in the world. Patrick Mahomes is hurt, your season's over. Like you're not winning a Super Bowl with you're not winning a Super Bowl with a Chad Henne, with a Shane Buechele. I think adding 3 was very intentional for the dynamics within that organization, the future plans. Like if Chad Henne's not going to be there, they were getting out ahead of something that they felt strongly about, keeping Shane Buechele. I'm surprised that this team did it, especially with some of the other numbers crunches there, but having a little bit of flexibility on, Elijah Lee, and, who knows what happens with Austin Ryder here. Like there was some flexibility where the practice squad is going to shape out decently, I think still. But they keep 3. We were all, I don't know. I don't think me or Maddie or Craig were necessarily advocating for 3, but the Chiefs made that decision. There's obviously a reason behind it. I think Shane Buechele is going to be here for a while.
I can't support 3 quarterbacks unless you're talking about going into the playoffs. Your third quarterback, you are just as good. If a guy's only your third quarterback, you're just as good signing anybody off of a practice squad or anything like that to go out there for an emergency. The differences between your QB3 and another team's QB3 is so minimal. In my opinion, I understand that systems matter. And that's why when you get to the playoffs and it's an emergency must-win situation, I understand the move. To start the year, 3 quarterbacks is a hard pill to swallow. I agree with you, though. This means that Shane Buechele does have a future in Kansas City as a backup quarterback. I just think this move makes a lot more sense if Chad Henne did end up retiring this offseason like was rumored, or if they were going to find a way to move on from him as well, because holding off 2 roster spots that are only going to be out there if Mahomes gets hurt, which essentially tanks your season anyway, it's an interesting tactic when you are dealing with a worst case scenario kind of situation, to me.
I'm with Maddie a little bit. I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth because I trust Brett Veach. I trust his staff to know what they're doing, and they have all the contingency plans that they've talked through. They've had a lot of these probably same conversations. I just don't know with a roster and in the talent that you're letting go of guys who can get snaps, who can step out on the field, if the value created by having Patrick Mahomes feel more comfortable with another guy in that room, if that value is enough to warrant not having snaps from a player that we just let go in order to keep him. Because we're not talking about Shane Buechele going out and playing right now like that. We're not making the decision for that. This is about having that guy long-term. I joked with Nate Taylor on KCSN update earlier, because that news was already out, that what this tells me is that Shane Buechele can go buy a house in Kansas City. He can, start finding some schools. He can get comfortable with what he's doing. He's going to be here for a while. But I'm with Maddie in that I just don't understand keeping 3 quarterbacks unless there's a market. I know some people have been talking about it with Chad Henne. Maybe there's a trade there, but in that case, I still am not exactly comfortable if Patrick Mahomes has to miss a game or 2 trying to win a Super Bowl to trust Shane Buechele to go out there and win those games like we would trust Chad Henne, like we needed to see from Matt Moore a few years ago. I think the roster is too deep that you just let somebody go that was going to give you snaps at one point or another, even if he was one of your inactives each week. There's going to be a guy that we just let go that could have gotten snaps for us that we ended up wanting to keep a future backup quarterback for. It also tells me that they had zero faith that they'd be able to keep Shane Buechele, because there's also that side of it that they thought somebody was going to snag him. They didn't want to put him on waivers.
Well, the Cardinals
maybe they
tried
wait a few weeks and then maybe they wait a few weeks and then release him. They don't want teams once they get settled into the season, they don't want to make them move then. But I'm with Maddie in that I would never keep 3 quarterbacks as deep as this roster is going to be right now.
Well, and they did towards the end of the year, because the Cardinals did come for Shane Buechele last year. So that is something that you got to take into consideration. First opponent, first week, Arizona Cardinals. I adding 3 quarterbacks, fascinating. 5 running backs too, 4 traditional running backs and Michael Burton. I found that interesting too, just from a pure roster construction perspective. Keeping 4 traditional running backs. Ronald Jones is the guy that looked and appeared to be on the bubble. Andy Reid had some nice things to say about Rojo here today. Thought he came on strong, had a solid end of the performance, liked what he did. Got a little bit more comfortable catching the football. So some of those things that the Chiefs value, it seems like Ronald Jones has improved, has stepped up his game lately here. Because it looked like he was on the outside looking in until, I don't know, a week ago, Matt.
It did. And that's, I guess with the Ronald Jones situation, it's weird because if you're to believe Andy Reid, and I don't know why we shouldn't at this point in time, but if you're going to believe him, Ronald Jones kind of figured out the Chiefs' way of doing stuff. He started taking to the coaching a little bit better. He started fitting in more, and that really showed the last couple weeks of practice and going into that last preseason game. And I think if you watch that game and how he was moving compared to some other of the earlier games, it's pretty evident. But you also have to look at, they gave him downhill runs. They finally gave him the runs that we've been pounding the table for them to do for everybody, and they only gave him to Ronald Jones. And guess what? They were blocked well. He looked good on them. He ran them very well, but they were also blocked really well. So it's kind of this combination of how much of it was in the preseason game. We don't know about the practice, but in the game, how much of the looking better was based around the fact that the Chiefs kind of played to what we perceive some of the offensive line strengths, some of the running back strengths, versus how much was it him actually being better. I also want to say, I hope that means when the season starts, that's what we're going to see. I hope it was okay, Ronald Jones, show us that you can do what we want to do during the regular season, because you are fighting for a roster spot. He answers the challenge when he's presented with this thing that they're going to see over the next 17 weeks, and he does well. And if that's the player we get on those types of runs, sprinkled in throughout the year, then cool. 2 thumbs up. It's only surprising to me when you do it in conjunction with the 3 quarterbacks, which still leads back to the same issue. 4 halfbacks plus 3 quarterbacks plus 4 tight ends. That's a lot of extra roster spots at those positions for me.
It also makes sense when you looked at Clyde Edwards-Helaire has been banged up throughout his career. Jerick McKinnon has been a little banged up. And outside of that, you had Isaiah Pacheco. And unless we want a CJ Spiller situation where you're signing and letting go a guy every single week, it would also make sense. And I think all of this there's no one reason. It's just accumulation of different things. But at the running back position and the pounding those guys take, especially with the body type of like a Jerick McKinnon, he's not going to handle 20 carries. Not that any running back for the Chiefs ever get 20 carries in a game, but those guys get banged up, they get hit. And if Ronald Jones is going to be better than anyone they could find, and you're going to need snaps from somebody else coming out of the backfield, it makes sense in that regard. If Maddie, to your point, the taking of the coaching and that he started to fall in, and we know he has the athletic ability. We know he has the ability to run away from people that we've seen from Jerick McKinnon. Hopefully see from Isaiah Pacheco. We know he has the speed to do it. I just haven't seen it at this level yet, but it's the one knock on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who we expect, and I talked about it with Nate, still expect Clyde Edwards-Helaire to finish as the Chiefs' leading rusher, but running away from defensive backs for these 30, 40, 50-yard gains has not been something we've seen from him. Maybe we see it now. He's a little bit more healthy. Maybe we see him run away from guys, but it wasn't a huge part of his game at LSU either. And so in that regard, chasing from behind, injuries can happen. I understand the Ronald Jones thing, especially we wanted to see it. We talked about it on the post-game show. We just wanted to see him get some carries and show some kind of success to where that, not that we are all super optimistic about what he was going to be able to bring, but felt good when they made that signing. Like that's a solid signing at this point in the running back position to have that guy in that room.
We're looking at the wide receiver position now, and I think the only big surprise I would say at the, for the 53-man roster projections, like the biggest one for sure, but Darius Fountain on the outside looking in. The Chiefs are keeping 5 receivers. Justin Watson is the 5th receiver. I think that was absolutely undoubtedly the correct move there. He has some special teams experience, plenty of special teams experience in his NFL career. I think that potentially made Darius Fountain expendable, although I could see him being a guy they look to add back onto the 53-man roster after the dust settles here a little bit, Maddie.
I think he'd be a guy they want to get to the practice squad so they can bring him up throughout the year as they need him, kind of like they started last year doing. The 5 wide receiver move is very surprising to me, especially when you know that you're only going to have, at least right now, 3 healthy tight ends. I think that's where it really catches me off guard, is the Chiefs are only having 3 tight ends plus 5 wide receivers. That's not a ton of pass catching options compared to what most NFL teams are going to carry. If it was, if Blake Bell was healthy, it would make more sense. You might see heavier personnel. You might not need to be as deep at wide receiver. So it definitely shocking. I think seeing Fountain get cut, I think that almost guaranteed. I hinted at it earlier, that meant Chris Lamons was making this team 100%. Like there's 2 of your starting special teamers from the preseason. There was no chance they were going to lose both of them. So no Fountain kind of locked that in. Surprising, but I think to Kent's point, I don't know if that's a huge knock to the Chiefs. I think Fountain's a good special teams player. I don't know if he's a Marcus Kemp or Chris Lamons level guy from the way Dave Tobe sees it, just based on how he's talked about those guys and who got kept on the team over all these years.
Before we get to the offensive line to wrap up this show, breaking down the roster, and we appreciate everybody who's commenting, everybody who's liked and subscribed. Please go ahead and continue to do that. We appreciate your support. But looking at the roster, I know I saw a comment when we first started that somebody projected Justin Watson have 400 yards and 5 touchdowns, or it was 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. It was one of the two. Guys, where do you see Justin Watson fitting in with this team offensively, and how quickly has he emerged as a guy that you could count on before training camp to where we sit right here today?
I think he's a viable threat. And we talked about some of the routes that he was running, from the slot, some of those deep crosses, the slice route. He's a guy with that linear speed, enough strength to break through contact at the line of scrimmage and want to run away from guys. I think that specific linear trait is something that's extremely valuable. Showed some ability to track the football, catch athletically away from his frame, make adjustments to the ball. Like, there's a lot of positive traits that I think that have shown themselves to this point, that I think there's a role for him to play a little bit on the offensive side of the ball. Do I think he's going to be a target monster or a huge, contributor on the offensive side? No, but I think there's a role for him. I think he's going to be valuable. Real quick, let's jump to the offensive line real quick. One quick surprise. No, not a ton of interior line. Alignment. I think that there is a chance that we could see the Chiefs going out and making a claim on an interior offensive lineman once the dust clears. Darian Kennard might be time to start looking to play along the interior of the offensive line too. Those were kind of my takeaways. I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts outside of that on the offensive line, but that's kind of where I sat.
They must feel pretty good about Nick Allegretti being able to play either guard spot or center. And they should. He's been around long enough. He's played all those spots to them. So they must feel really good about him being the backup for all 3 of those spots. And I think that kind of helps cover some of your interior offensive line woes. Add on the fact that Darian Kennard can maybe jump in there if need be. If they have the time, Austin Ryder should be available for the practice squad. I think he was on a practice squad last year, so it's not like there were teams knocking down his door. But in terms of offensive line, the other thing I got to say about that, go see what Alex Leatherwood's up to. Like, I know that he busted for the Raiders. Like, that is the one clear guy that I think 31 of the other NFL teams should be looking at. But I think the Chiefs situation with Andy Heck as the O-line coach, I think the fit makes a lot of sense. I think he's the kind of coach that could maximize him. So bring him in, whether you want to play him at guard or tackle. Like, I think that is the one player. If I got to choose one guy that Chiefs should bring in, or at least try to, he would be the first on the list. And like I said, most teams will probably be trying to get a first round level offensive tackle get in free agency after 1 year. But still, if that would be like the one move the Chiefs could make, I think that would go a long way.
Yeah, I saw a report the Chiefs were planning or hoping to bring back Austin Ryder to the practice squad, and then the Prince Tega Wanago. I mean, that's a Kent. We talked about him during the post-game show. A little surprised to see him, but would have been one of those bubble guys if they wanted to keep an extra tackle. If you don't feel comfortable about what you see around the league and guys who might get released outside of Matty, the guy you were just talking about in Leatherwood, but that was the one that, when you look at the offensive lines, a little bit surprising. Hopefully they can get Ryder back, a guy with veteran experience to be on the practice squad if they need him. But yeah, you're always looking for offensive linemen.
The initial 53-man roster has been set. Any changes that happen between now and the live laboratory at 8 p.m. tomorrow, we will be breaking down any changes that happen. We are so excited for football season to start. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you don't miss anything we've got going on at KCSN, because there's a lot of it. Thanks everyone for watching this. We'll be back throughout the week, and we'll catch you later.